Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so right now I am with Tom Delgado, or you might know him as Tom the NYC.
Hey, how you doing? How's it
Thank you
going,
for doing this
Pandji?
with me,
Of
my
course, thank you, thank you.
It's really an honor for me because I rarely get starstruck.
Oh man, you're gonna make me get embarrassed now.
To put into context, tell my Indonesian audience. So when I know that I'm going to move to New York, I start watching videos about New York, and the closer I get to the date that I'm supposed to move to New York, the more content I consume. And then of all of the videos that I watch on YouTube regarding New York, Tom has a very different take on it. It's very interesting. I really love watching all his videos. You should subscribe him. It's Tom the NYC, right?
That's right.
So Tom does content about New York, but on a historical
Sure, yeah.
side of it, and it's very interesting. And the thing that I think was also made it different is because Tom is pretty hilarious, and I was like, I wasn't surprised when you said in one of the videos that you're also a stand-up comic.
Yeah, yeah.
And so yeah, and that's your content is also where I first hear Lucy's voice.
Yeah.
Because Lucy was doing a video for you.
Yeah.
And so when I make my own vlogs, I reference Tom's content a lot. I tell stories about the history of Brooklyn, of Queens, and whatnot. And I always tell people that I got it from Tom. And I don't know if my audience came to your video.
Yeah.
They did.
Well, what happened was it's funny how like roundabout. So Lucy's my girlfriend,
right?
And I got a comment randomly on I was just checking my comments. I don't check my comments too often because they can be pretty brutal sometimes. I don't know if you guys are on YouTube a lot, but those things can get depressing. And I was checking them once, and someone said, "Oh, Pandji sent me here," and I saw a couple. I was like, "Who's Pandji?" So I went to your channel. I was like, "Oh, this is cool." I was like, this guy's a comedian from Indonesia. I was like, this is really interesting. And I think I came across one that said you were moving here, or you were planning on moving here. And Lucy, my girlfriend, runs a podcast.
Yeah.
And she runs a podcast called Immigrant Jam, where she talks to immigrant comedians to the United States, because she's an immigrant from Germany. And she has this podcast, and I mentioned your name as a possible guest, and she looked you up, and she's like, this is great. So she contacted you and had you as a guest.
Yeah.
And it was
awesome.
perfect, yeah. And she's great, and the podcast is really great. And you posted that as well, I believe. And so so that's how it kind of happened. Then I met you at her show, which is also called Immigrant Jam, which is a monthly show here in the city. So
it's great. And I've been wanting to do this interview for quite some time because I have so many questions to ask.
Let's shoot, man.
Regarding stand-up comedy, but also history.
Yeah, of course.
I have trivial questions. Is that okay?
Trivial questions?
No,
is that what
yeah.
Like small and unimportant? There's no such thing as an unimportant question. Come on, they're all important.
Right.
Whatever you got.
Okay. Let's start with. So I don't know if you know this or not, but there's something in relation between Indonesia and specifically Manhattan. So. Manhattan was ruled or run by the Dutch, I think, at one point.
Yeah.
And they trade island with the British because the British was on hold in this island. I think it was Rote Island in Indonesia, and they switched, and so the British controlled the island in Indonesia, and the Dutch controlled the island in Indonesia, and the British controlled Manhattan. So I thought the British was colonizing the U.S., but at some point it was the Dutch?
Yes, so the Dutch were actually the first ones to kind of come to this area here, to the New York area, right? And at that time, like the Dutch were a really powerful country. And it's interesting, people don't realize this, but in the 1600s, what the Dutch were doing with basically what became capitalism was a new idea. You know, you got the British. These people are monarchies. You know, it's the crown that's funding a lot of different things. So in the Dutch, in the Netherlands, you know, you had basically the first mega corporation at the time. It was exactly the Dutch East India Company, right? And they were the ones who went out east or whatever and looked for routes to find spices in Asia and all that stuff, right? So they were actually looking for a route to that side, to Asia, when they basically stumbled on Manhattan.
And when they arrived in Manhattan, were there other imperialist?
No, not yet.
Oh.
It was the first. So basically, this guy Henry Hudson, who was in the employ of the Dutch East India Company, who basically stumbled on here thinking that the Hudson River was a route to India, and it was not. Obviously, he basically like went back and was like, "Hey guys, I found this really cool island." They're like, "Did you find a route to India?" He's like, "No." He's like, "You're fired." So he basically was like, "All right," but they saw that there was all this like wildlife and people. Well, it was Native Americans here. And so they started settling, and like 15 years later, you have what became Manhattan became New York. Well, New Amsterdam at first. Sorry.
Is Manhattan a Dutch word?
Manhattan is not a Dutch word. It's actually a Native American. What they believe it's Mannahatta. There's a couple like possible interpretations, but they believe it's Mannahatta, which means land of many hills or island of hills, something along those lines. Land of many hills, pretty much. And it's from the Lenape Native Americans who were here before.
Are they still around?
Not really, no. They were part of the Algonquin Nation, which is a bigger nation, and there are still Algonquins and everything like that, but in this area there really are not too many left.
And you told me, you said that in one of your videos that Queens used to be a different city. Is that city?
No, Brooklyn used to be a different city. Yes, so Queens is actually the name of what used to be a county. So they established these counties when the British were still in control. Queens County. Oh, the British Queen. Kings County. The King. Oh, look at that. Those are still the names of the counties, right? You had Kings County, which is where Brooklyn is, and you have Queens County. You have other ones as well. Richmond County. All these different. So right. So the one that became Brooklyn. Brooklyn was its own city, right? And Queens County, when it consolidated. So back up here. One very important date in New York history is 1898. That's when the 5 boroughs of New York became New York City, rather than just Manhattan.
Right.
Before 1898, Manhattan, the little island there, was all of New York City. Then you had Brooklyn. Then you had these towns that were in Queens County, right? You had these other things. But in 1898, all of that smushed together and became one mega city, right?
Right. So what was the decision behind, what was the reason behind the decision? Why couldn't it just be different cities?
Yeah, right here, baby.
Right, okay.
This is the United States of America, Pandji. Come on. It's always money. It's always money. But to be more specific, the water system as well was a little more advanced, a little bit better in Manhattan, quote, New York City. So Brooklyn wanted the water as well. And Brooklyn was the last holdout because Brooklyn was its own city, because it had its own economy, it had its own pride and all that. They held out until 1898. Because they were trying to get it started way earlier. And it was only by a vote that they passed by this much in Brooklyn that they decided to join up. And it was its own city. It was the 4th largest city in the United States at the time.
Wow.
So that'd be like today, that'd be like New York City combining with Houston, Texas to create a
That's crazy.
Yeah, it'd be pretty much like that. And so it was a big deal when it happened, Yeah.
And so how did Queens become Queens that we know? I think it's the most diverse.
Yes.
Place.
Queens is the most diverse place in the world, they say.
In the world, yeah. And what happened? Because if it's only by chance, it could have been Brooklyn, right?
It could have been Brooklyn. Well, Brooklyn's also extremely diverse. Brooklyn's right up there. In the same list that ranked diversity, Brooklyn is up there in the top 5, I believe, as well. So so it's not far behind. But Queens is up there. It's just
And it's crazy.
Yeah,
I mean,
it is crazy.
Yeah. What happened? What draw the immigrants to Queens?
Well, once again, it was cheaper. I think that's a big part of it. So in the turn of the 20th century, in the 1900s, you had a huge influx of immigrants coming into New York, tons and tons. That's like the biggest boom there was. That's the heyday of Ellis Island. That's when you had a lot of immigration coming in. And so immigrants who were moving up, who had already come at kind of like the second generation, who had established, made some money, were looking to get out of the slums of Manhattan, the Lower East Side, Little Italy, where it's all crowded. They wanted to move out. And it was around this time that Queens was also developing. Developers went in there and started making little homes, for middle class. Like, nice, you get your own yard and all this.
Right.
The bridge, the Queensboro Bridge, had just been finished in 1909. And so all of this was like a new place where you could go and get a lot for your money. So immigrants kind of just started to kind of go out there. First generation, second generation, all that stuff. And then throughout the 1900s, as you had more immigrants come in, Indian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, you had, all these other immigrant groups coming in, Latin American, Chinese, all these, they started to go out there as well because it was also a little bit cheaper and not as populated as Manhattan was.
Right. And so it's also very interesting. One of the weirdest experience for me being in Queens was in Main Street, Flushing.
Sure. Very cool place.
Yeah, it's very cool. But nobody speaks English.
No.
Even if you walk in Main Street and you see the stores and shops, they're all in Chinese.
Yeah.
And as a Muslim, I wanted to buy food for I don't know what's the word. It's sahur in Indonesia. It's where you eat early in the morning before you start fasting.
Okay.
And so I wanted to buy like fried rice, and then nobody speaks English. I was like, how is this possible? Is it always like that for different cultures, where you can be amongst your people so much that you don't feel like the need to learn English?
Yeah, I think, well, it depends. I think one of the things you have in New York, especially at any given moment, is you have certain groups that are coming in. So, for example, what you saw was Chinese. You saw a huge Chinatown, which is one of the 5 Chinatowns in New York.
There are 5.
There's 5, arguably more, depending on what you classify as a town. So you saw Chinatown, and the reason that exists is because there's currently an influx of Chinese.
Right.
A lot of Chinese people coming in, right? So today there's lots of Mexican coming in as well. So you have different areas of town that are also highly Mexican and also Latin American, right? So these things will dictate where there's a town, right? So Little Italy is not really Italian anymore because there aren't that many Italians coming in anymore.
I heard there's also Chinatown near, or Little Italy is inside a Chinatown?
Yeah, so down in Lower Manhattan is where the first Chinatown is, right? And what happened is Little Italy started shrinking and Chinatown has been growing. So basically Chinatown has swallowed up Little Italy. And the problem too is that there's not really any Italians to replace the Italians that die off or move away.
Right.
So it just disappears with time.
Yeah,
so in the early 1900s, all of that area would have been Italian.
Right.
Today it's all Chinese, and some other things as well, but it's kind of taken over.
Right.
Yeah.
So what makes maybe a neighborhood, I don't know what the word is, what makes a neighborhood called Chinatown or Little India or Little Italy? What's the definition of that? Because there's no Little Indonesia or Indonesia town.
Right. Well, there isn't, I would say only because there isn't such a huge presence. As soon as you have one, as soon as you have an influx of people who come from a certain place and they congregate in one area, you have kind of that sense of a little area, Like in Jackson Heights, for example, you have Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and you have what they call Little Bangladesh, Little Pakistan, all this stuff. There's not a huge sign that says "Welcome to Little Pakistan," but there is the businesses, there is the people hanging out, talking, and whatever. So
and
you have those
most
things.
of the time, it's not themselves calling in.
Exactly.
People.
Yes.
So that means it has to be visually seen by people that there's a lot of Korean going on.
Right.
Like I live in Bayside. I think North and Boulevard. I think all the businesses are Korean, like Korean cafe, Korean bakery, Korean barbecue. I was like, is this a little K-town or something? Or I don't know, because I think that's if you see a certain culture in a certain place, then you call it.
Yes, or the businesses there call it that too.
Right.
Like a business will call itself, K-Town Grocery or K-Town whatever, or they'll refer to themselves as K-Town, or it just kind of slowly, gets the reputation. Or new people move in, they're like, you should move over to K-Town from Korea, and they rent out their apartment or they lease a building or whatever. So it slowly kind of takes its own, but it requires people coming in from a place, to keep it alive, and keep it kind of going. And that's what you have in Chinatown. So Chinatown, there's still more people coming in. And then so the people who then, either die off or their children and grandchildren don't need to stay there anymore because they speak English, they know the country, they know the city, so they can move away, they get replaced by new, fresh immigrants, right? That's the whole idea.
Sometimes when a country colonized a place, you can see even today their
influence.
Their influence in architectural or governments or whatever. Which country gave the most influence to New York? Is it the Dutch or is it the British, or was there any other country?
I mean, well, the Dutch. It depends, I guess, on what you consider influence. I mean, every single culture that's passed through has given some kind of influence, whether it's through the arts, through I'm reading a book right now called Jewish New York, and it's talking about the influence of Jews coming through New York. You have the Dutch influence. Obviously, when they came, they established the colony and the different rules and the traditions and all this stuff. And the British, obviously, as well. So, and then, all the different types of Americans that have passed through. There is an interesting book, though, I guess, called Island at the Center of the World. by this guy Russell Shorto, who talks about the Dutch influence. Which, because it's interesting about the Dutch influence, is that they only basically had New Amsterdam for about 40 years, from 1625 to 1664. And so in that short time, they were able to lay the groundwork of what we know today at New York to be, meaning they injected it with this ultra-capitalistic, money-driven society, but also with an openness and a tolerance for different groups, because the Dutch were way more tolerant than the British. They cared about money more. They cared about business and all that, so they were open to people. It's like, if you're Jewish and you're going to come here and make money, if you're this place, you speak this language, we don't care. So that was what kind of trumped everything, is this, and so it made it more open, and it made it more, I guess, energetic and hustling, and time is money and all that stuff. And those two things still very much define New York.
Yes.
And they say it's because of the Dutch. Russell Shorto has a great book, and he talks about how the Dutch really kind of laid that groundwork, whereas other parts of the United States in the Northeast, like Boston, Philadelphia, Rhode Island, all these areas don't have that as much as New York. And it's because they were founded by the British, or they were founded by religious groups that were escaping something in Europe. The people who came here came under the Dutch West India Company at the time to make money.
Right.
It's very different, right?
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah, it is cool.
I think the Dutch was in Indonesia for, I think, around 250 to 300 years. But
they were in a lot of places too. They were in South
Yeah.
America, all these places.
and
Yeah.
to think they're just such a small country
Yeah,
when you think
yeah.
about it, it's kind of crazy. But the influence, the capitalism influence, I don't feel was felt as much in Indonesia. I don't know why. Maybe because religion has always been a stronger and bigger theme in Indonesia. But it's very interesting, and it makes sense regarding the culture, the capitalistic nature of New York. I want to ask another question,
Yeah.
but this is just, I think I remember in one of your video you say Houston Street is pronounced Houston because
Sure.
it's based on a person's name.
Yeah.
Is it the same with Greenwich Village?
Yes.
Being pronounced Greenwich?
Yeah, yeah. It's spelled like Greenwich, but it's pronounced Greenwich after the British way of pronouncing it. The British pronounce their words a little
I
weird,
see.
and so they named it Greenwich. There's a neighborhood in London called Greenwich.
Oh, okay.
And it's actually where Greenwich Median Time comes from, which is like,
Oh,
like
yeah,
GMT,
yeah, GMT.
That's where it comes from. It comes from the English, from Greenwich. And
so it's not based off a person's name.
no,
No.
it was based off a neighborhood's name.
Neighborhood. But
yeah.
Houston is...
So what happened with Houston is it was named after a man named William Houston. It's actually spelled differently. His name was. It was Houston.
Houston.
Yep.
Houston.
Over time, it warped into Houston, but they still pronounce it Houston for that guy.
Right.
The guy was like, he was like an important American at the time. He signed the Declaration of Independence. He married into one of the most famous rich families in New York at the time. This is the early 1800s, so they named it after this guy. But over time, it warped into Houston.
Yeah, speaking of a famous person
Writing.
being a name of a place, I'm sorry if my only knowledge of American politics is from Hamilton. But,
That's great. I think Hamilton's a great story.
Yeah, but Lafayette is, I mean, there's Lafayette Street, or is it Avenue?
I think it's Avenue. Yeah.
Lafayette
Yeah.
Avenue?
I believe. I don't know. Don't quote me on that.
LaGuardia is an airport,
But yeah.
but is Alexander Hamilton a name of a street or not?
Hamilton. They have the neighborhood of Hamilton Heights up near Harlem. They call it Hamilton Heights. That's where the Grange is, which is the house he lived in up in Harlem, and that has the name Hamilton Heights.
And I watched Hamilton, but I didn't really understand the history of the United States, right? And so I was trying to figure out the significance. I understand that Hamilton is he's very passionate, and he's very important in the movement. But and he was, I think he was the Minister of Treasury.
He was the Secretary of Treasury.
Secretary of Treasury.
Yeah.
But what was the reason that makes, because people go to his grave, I think it was on a financial district.
Yeah, on Trinity Church.
Yeah. What makes Hamilton specifically unique compared to other? Because like Lafayette, or like what makes this person?
So Lafayette was French, first of all. He was French, and the reason they gave him his own streets because they loved Lafayette because he helped the United States, you know, especially in the Revolution and the War of Independence, all that stuff. He was a big deal. So he was a different thing, I guess. LaGuardia came along later. He was a mayor of New York. He was a very important mayor. He was a mayor during the Great Depression, and he helped secure work for people in New York. He was very, very visible out in the streets. He was a very like charismatic guy, a friend of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was an important president. So those two are kind of distinct. What makes Hamilton interesting, I think, is that he came along at a time, one, when the United States wasn't really a thing. When the revolution happened and finished in 1783, it was done pretty much. Started in 1775, 76, and then it went through to 1783. This time, there wasn't really a country. And so what he did was he helped shape what today we know as the United States. He was vocal. He had his own bank. He started his own newspaper. He was a theorist. He came up with theories on what the government should look like. He was the Secretary of the Treasury, which also shaped the power of the federal government. He basically, you know, had a say in what the power of that central government is today. It's interesting because his feud with another important figure, which is Thomas Jefferson, he's the guy on the $20 bill, and the $10 bill is Hamilton. But they had a feud. Jefferson didn't want a strong central government. He wanted more power to the states, right? Hamilton wanted powerful central government. Also, Jefferson didn't want the capital in New York City. The capital was in New York City originally, of the United States. Originally.
It was only Philadelphia.
It was New York City, actually. This is where George Washington was sworn in as first president, on Wall Street. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Jefferson...
Oh, there's a statue.
There is a statue, exactly where it happened. That's right. Yeah, you know your stuff. This guy knows. He's the guide here. Come on. You guys follow him everywhere. But yeah, there's a statue there. So Jefferson didn't want the capital here because he thought it was too far north. He thought it was too commercial. It would corrupt the government. And Hamilton did want it here, right? So they made a compromise. The compromise was Jefferson allowed Hamilton to take the debts of the states for the federal government, giving the federal government more power over the states, and Hamilton let Jefferson have the capital out of New York. So they moved it to D.C. eventually. They moved it first to Philadelphia briefly, then to D.C.
When was the separation? Because Jakarta right now is the center of it's a political city, but it's also a business city.
Sure.
Whereas in the U.S., it's D.C. and New York.
Right.
In China, it's Beijing and Shanghai.
Right.
When was the separation of politics and business in New York?
That was pretty much it.
Oh, that was
I
it?
think because what you think, initially the capital was in New York because it just made sense. It's where everything happened. Like it's where all the stuff was centered. The British had taken it over as the headquarters during the Revolution because of its location and all this stuff. So it was just natural that it would come here. The separation happened right there pretty much. And New York still continues to influence the country, obviously, but it's not where the political power is located. And it's arguable that that's not the real power in the United States, that it's really this. Again, this is the symbol for the United States. But yeah, that's kind of when it happened.
Okay, so now we can have a sense of why New York is important politically and also economically. But where does art comes in? Because I don't know, but it seems like, or maybe it's because it was so loud with political movement, and art thrives because not only music but also comedy, stand-up comedy, have the start and the boom in the city. So what happened? I
think what ends up happening in a place like New York, where you constantly have people passing through from different parts of the world, is you have an interchange. You have a dialogue between different groups. When you have other cities that started out kind of more homogenous, of one type of person, there isn't as much kind of interchange, you know? And that happens just with port cities generally. With a port city generally, you're going to have more interchange, and that creates the businesses that leads to, you know, different cooperations, that leads to all kinds of things. In New York, you had the added, I guess, the added kind of influence of people from literally everywhere in the world passing through here. And not just anybody, but people who had a lot of ambition, who had lots of resources, all this stuff, and they came in lots and lots of people, lots of high numbers, really. So because of that, I think you have this interchange. You also have the stimuli that I guess stimulates artists. You have people everywhere. You know, you have people like Walt Whitman talked about. He was very influenced by all the people he saw and all the giant projects that are being birthed here. That's going to influence you as a person to want to create and to inspire you. You know, it's very inspiring in that way.
Right.
You know, I always tell people it's very hard to stay depressed when you live in New York because you're outside and you're constantly being bombarded with stuff. If you're in your house and you're just like, man, my life sucks. Well, you walk outside and you're like, holy crap, look at that guy's getting into a fight. That person's selling oranges. This couple's, about to get it. There's just so much stuff happening that you're just bombarded, And I think as an artist too, that helps. Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of stand-up comedy, I think I listened to this podcast, The History of Stand-Up by I don't remember, Wayne Federman.
Oh, okay.
Wayne Federman. And then he said the first comedy exclusive club is Comedy Store in LA, but the first place that then becomes a comedy club was the Improv, and it's not around anymore.
No.
Do you know where it used to be?
Well, there used to be, the Improv was here. I don't remember the exact address, but it was here, and there was a few clubs that are no longer here. But also, too, you talk about what stand-up looks like today. A lot of that actually has roots in New York as well, like this idea of going on stage and just like telling jokes, whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously, it has its roots in vaudeville and all this, but the idea of someone just going on stage with a microphone and entertaining you for an hour is kind of, I mean, think about it, back then would have been crazy.
It would be.
Like you it's part of a show. You go in, you tell some jokes. You're wearing a costume, whatever. But it kind of also developed through also New York and also a lot of the Jewish immigrants here.
Oh, yeah.
There was a big, I guess, what they call the Borscht Belt. When you go out to the Catskills, right outside of New York, a lot of the Jews would go out there on their vacations and stuff, and a lot of Jackie Mason, a lot of these big comedians, kind of learned to be stand-up comics there. They would just basically be like, all right, you got to entertain today, 1 hour, and they had to do it night after night. So they had to learn how to play with the crowd, learn how to tell jokes and write jokes and all this stuff. Because before, if you think about it, stand-up comedy a lot of times was just telling other people's jokes. Like you would just tell other people's jokes. This idea of coming up with your own original stuff and all that kind of developed as a result too of New York as well. Yeah.
Was that the reason you come to New York?
No,
because you're from Florida.
That's not the reason at all. Actually, I'm from Florida originally. I went to law school in Atlanta, and that's the reason I came here.
That's also what I learned from your video.
Yeah.
You said that your parents is not upset. Is not the word.
No, they were not. They're not upset. Actually, I like to joke. I like to joke around about it, but they're not. They're not upset. But they were surprised. I guess I came up here as a lawyer, worked in law for a few years, and I just hated it. So I started taking improv classes. I took writing classes, and then I eventually stumbled on stand-up and just really fell in love with it.
Should have been good at that.
Yeah, it was. It was way better than it is now. I'll tell you that much.
But it wasn't as fulfilling, I think.
No, it wasn't. I hated it. And so I started doing stand-up at nights, all that stuff, and then after time, I basically saved up money. I got a couple of breaks. I got an agent to do this and all that, and I was like, all right, screw it, I'm out. I left. And then it's been a struggle since, ups and downs, all that, but I've never looked back 1 second,
Yeah.
And that's another thing too, real quick. That's a beautiful thing about New York too, is you're finding it out for yourself now as just recently arrived. Right. There's people everywhere. There's relationships to be made everywhere. There's people to inspire you everywhere. There's classes to take by the best people everywhere. It's just the opportunity is limitless. Whereas if you go to a city like Tampa, where I'm from, you could do stand-up there, but you're not going to be, inspired by the best stand-ups in the country. You're not going to be learning from the best stand-ups in the country. You're not going to be going to the best venues in the country. You're not going to have all that at your disposal. Yeah. So it really kind of increases the opportunities you have,
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think I'm trying to remember. I think it was maybe in August or maybe I don't remember. I watched, or maybe it was last month. I watched Chris Rock at the Radio City Music Hall. And I was like, if it wasn't because I'm here now living in New York, I wouldn't be able to just watch Chris Rock.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So how long have you been doing stand-up?
I've been doing stand-up in New York for about 11 years. I've been doing stand-up for like 11 years here in New York. And on and off, obviously. I do some acting stuff. I started the YouTube stuff as well. So, but I did my first set 11 years ago,
So I've been here 11 months, right? It feels like there's two routes in New York comedy. There's like the comedy club routes, and I feel I have a sense of how to do and ways to conduct your hustle.
Yeah.
But there's also like alternative forms where it's not, where people can say that I don't have to get a pass at a comedy club, or I can just do.
And that's just two. There's other routes too. I mean,
wow.
there's routes, and you have like the urban rooms. You have all these different places where people you go to different rooms, and you're like, holy crap, I've never seen this person in my life, but they've been doing stand up for 15 years. They've just been doing it there, there's tons of routes. There's so many different things you can do. You can start your own show. There's alternative. There's Brooklyn. There's comedy in Queens and the Bronx, everywhere. So there is a lot of ways to go about it. It's all up to how you want to do it.
Are you taking one of the routes, or are you?
I guess I don't really think about it that way. I guess I just kind of do what I kind of want to do, and obviously, like, it's better to push yourself and do different stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I guess right now I do this weekly show. We're actually in a basement right now. You guys are like, where the hell are they? We're actually in a basement where we do a weekly show every Wednesday, and that's why I'm here. But yeah, do this every Wednesday, then do other people's shows. That's one of the cool things about New York too. You don't have to go to the comedy club for the best comedians either. They go to the comedy club, sure, but they also go to the shows around the city, because some of those shows are more fun.
Yeah.
And that's another cool thing. You don't get that as much when you go to smaller cities.
Yeah.
The cities will have their local, comedy club or whatever, and you can go see comedians that are passing through, but they don't have the shows in barber shops. They don't have shows at bookshops. They don't have shows in parks and all this kind of crazy stuff that you see in New York that you wouldn't see in other places. So.
Yeah, this is very interesting, because I thought originally, because I've been also watching Andrew Schultz's video.
Yeah, sure.
Content. I thought that the career path for a comic in New York is to hustle your way, to grind on your art to a point where you can get as much pass as you can get on as many comedy clubs.
Yes.
And there's a sense like there's a gatekeeper, and there's always two ways to look at gatekeepers. One, we understand that it's there to maintain quality, but at another side, you can see that it's limiting, it's not giving the most opportunities. And I felt like a lot of comics were like, well, yeah, I don't have to get a pass. Let's just, if I become funny, eventually maybe I get a pass. Does it feel like that? Is that the way you're thinking about your career as well?
You mean that it's changing from that, or that it is that?
That it's not that anymore.
No, it's not. I agree with you. I think it's not. I think you mentioned Andrew Schultz is a great example of someone who's completely just like skyrocketed, going his own way. And I think what we're doing here, this is a YouTube video. You do enough of these where people are like, oh, I like this guy. This guy's great. You don't have to be seen, at the main comedy club or on NBC or Saturday Night Live. You can do it this way, and you'll get enough people who are like, oh yeah, I like this person. I'm going to go to their show at the theater. I'm going to go to their show wherever. You don't need to do it anymore that way.
I think there were times where comedians, their whole goal is to be to be featured at a late night, but now it's not that case anymore.
No, it's not anymore, and comedy clubs are also responding. So as a comedy club, your job is to fill the seats. So if you got it between a guy who did who did the Colbert Show or whatever, great, that's good for him, that's great, or a guy who has a podcast who millions of people listen to, who do you think they're going to pick?
Yeah. You're right.
That's a no-brainer. They don't care who is the better quote comedian, because they both entertain people. They both do their own thing.
Right.
One guy writes jokes in a way that Colbert liked or whatever. That's fine, good for him. But the other person, entertains a lot of people, and that's where they go.
I think also the mentality of the audience. They were like, because I hear a lot. I don't know if it's okay for me to say this, but a lot of people think that comedy clubs. What's the word? It's too expensive because you have to buy tickets plus two drinks. And then a lot of people are like, look, we don't have to go to comedy clubs to watch comedy.
Well, not in New York, you don't. I mean, in other places you might. Like if you're living, like I said, in Tampa, Florida, there's a couple of comedy clubs, and the big names that pass through are going to go there. Here, that's not the case. Like we got every week we get people here who are on TV who play the same comedy clubs around the city, and they do the show here. And so people prefer to come to this because it's $8 to come in. And then they can order drinks and do all this stuff at their own pace if they want to buy whatever they can, all that stuff. And they end up doing it because they don't feel forced to. And then they find a place that they kind of make their own,
Like you in this.
Yeah, they get to know the hosts. They get to know the comedians. Like you'll see tonight, people hang out afterwards. They shake your hand like, oh, this is great. and they want to come back here because at a comedy club they're just shuffling you in. All right, everybody, take your seat. All right, everybody, out. We got another show. People are in there. Right, yeah. People are in line looking at their New York guide. Like, I heard this place is funny. You know, they don't care. Like the people who come to these types of shows come because they like this show. You know, and that changes the audience as well. The audience is more fun. They're more likely to laugh and enjoy themselves.
It's very true because the thing that I realize is that there's so much comedy shows every night.
Yeah. Almost too many. You know, not this one. This is a good one, but some of them. But yeah.
To a point where I think the more I get to know comics in New York, the more I realize that the career path that I was thinking is not really like that. I think a lot of comics are I'm just here to do comedy. Let me just grind and work on my art, and then opportunities will be given to me, and I can just perform as much as I can. How many? This is going to be a very weird question, but
hit me with it.
How many shows do you have to perform weekly to make a living?
Well, that depends on.
You understand that? Yeah.
That depends on what type of show. You can perform 100 shows and not make $1. You could perform shows and lose money. You know, it depends on where you're performing those shows. I mean, you could perform one show on the weekend and make more than someone who's performing 10 shows during the week, depending on where you do it. Mm-hmm. There are different ways to do it. I think what you mentioned before is interesting, is the fact that you have things like YouTube, you have things like podcasting, you have all these other ways to sustain yourself as you go out.
Right.
And what that does is it gives you freedom to then do the shows you want to do without having to think about money.
That makes sense.
So if the best show in town pays $15, you can do that show because you have other money coming in. Right. You know?
Is that also why when somebody, you can follow also Tom on his Instagram, also Tom DNYC.
Yep, that's right.
Most of the content you put out is the historical content.
Yes.
Some stand-up comedy.
Some.
Is that one of the reasons?
One of the reasons is because I kind of feel weird putting up the stand-up. To be honest, I kind of just, and I also, that's something I would like to see. I put the stuff that I would want to see.
I see.
And I would like to see more stuff that's funny and educational or whatever. Right. So I just put that on, and I'm also not very good on social media. Unfortunately, I'm not that good. I'm not like as prolific as I don't post every day on Instagram. I don't post stuff as often as I should. Right. But I do try to make stuff that's good, when I do make it. So, but that being said, maybe that's something I can get better on, I guess. But
But
yeah,
it's very interesting. In this chat or interview or whatever, you already mentioned that you mentioned several books.
Yeah.
You have always been reading books about history.
Yeah.
You always like history, but
love it.
Or is it something that you developed once you got here?
So what happened was, it's interesting you asked that. When I left the law job, when I left the legal world, I lived off savings for a year, and those savings disappeared after less than a year. I was just like, this is insane. It's very depressing. I don't want to tell you how much I lost. But then it was a matter of, what do I do now?
Right.
And it was either go back to law or find something else. And so I became a tour guide.
Oh, you were a tour guide?
I was a tour. I was a tour guide for years, and so as part of tour guiding, I learned the city, I learned the neighborhoods, I learned the history, and I've read up tons and tons.
How did someone become a tour guide?
It's it's the most challenging thing on the planet. That's a good question. No, you study, you take a test with the city, and then you just start working. And you
basically you work for the city?
No, you get licensed by the city, and then you work for companies. It's like a lawyer. Like, you get your license, and then you get hired.
Yeah.
Not as terrible as being a lawyer. Sorry if there are any lawyers, but you know what I mean. Like, it's you get licensed, and then you work somewhere.
And then you begin to love it too.
Yeah, I actually fell in love with it immediately because I just always loved reading and history and all that stuff. So it was really easy for me to pick it up and become decent at it really quickly.
And New York is, I guess it's perfect because of it. It has a lot of history. Tons of history,
tons of stories. I mean, you can mine the history of the city for multiple lifetimes and not reach it all.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
You always have new things to.
Always.
You have this one video where you were sitting in a subway train, and then you said that if you wait, it'll then go to I think it was the oldest subway station.
That's right. Look at you, this is number 2. This is the second time Pandji's got it right. Yes, that's correct. The 6 train It ends at Brooklyn Bridge, City Hall, and if you stay on it, after they say, okay, last stop, everyone off the train, if you stay on it, it uses the oldest station to turn around. So if you stay on it and you look up against the glass or you get in between cars, you can see the first station, which is the City Hall station, which no longer is in use because it's too small for the trains now. So they don't use it anymore. Right. But it's where the subway started in 1904. It was the first station.
Why didn't the city make something out of it? Like,
Well, they do give tours of it every now and then. They use it to turn around. There are a couple abandoned things on the subway. I guess it's just a whole little world down there, I don't know what they would make out of it. Maybe a park or something one day, but right now it's just kind of sitting there.
Do you have a favorite spot in New York because of its historical significance?
I guess it depends on what you mean, like neighborhood or place, an actual structure or place. I've always really liked
like a story, like
sure,
like the story of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think I love as a place. I love Grand Central. I think Grand Central is a really cool place. I used to go in there. I remember going in there for work when I would work in Midtown in the law office thing or whatever that I worked at. And it was always just an amazing thing. You walk in and you're just like, huh, this is pretty cool, man. I live in New York. It's like one of those things that reminds you where you live, Right. And it's funny because I used to do tours and stuff for people from Rome and Paris and all that stuff. And you'd take them around the city and they're like, yeah, this is okay, whatever. Because they come from these places that are so beautiful, but then you take them to Grand Central and they're like, oh, this is pretty cool. All right, cool. That's actually impresses the people who are hard to impress.
Right. Okay, so who are the, I'm trying to find the right word for it. Who were the comedians that were in your class right now that are still doing stand-up? Because some are not doing stand-up anymore.
The ones who didn't give it up, the ones who didn't get beaten down.
Yeah, are they? Is that a thing? Like, there's a class, there's a generation.
I mean, I guess so. Yeah, there are people you start around the same time as, and some people go on and continue with stand-up. But the thing is, like, the longer you do it, as you know, the more people go into other things. Some people go into TV writing, some people go into whatever, writing books, some people go into real estate, whatever. People go and they shift. But they still have stand-up there as a thing that kind of unites them a little bit. So yeah, a lot of people stick with it. Yeah, people quit. But I guess it depends on the degree. I guess the degree does change. The people who just only do stand-up, it starts to diminish a lot, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I still have a lot of questions to ask, but it's already 40 minutes.
Well, we can always do another episode, that's for sure.
You're right. I guess when you start doing stand-up, who was the comic that you look up to? Like,
when I started, I guess when I started, I really thought Zach.
Was Colin Quinn have always been in New York, a New York comic?
Yeah, he has actually a great. You should check out his New York. Have you seen it?
I did. It's awesome.
It's really cool.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, are you going to make something similar to it?
I don't know. Maybe I will. No, actually, I'm in the process right now of doing something.
Oh, okay, cool. That's cool. But back to the question. Who was the comic that you look up to?
At that time, I guess when I started, I remember watching Zach Galifianakis. Actually,
wow.
That was
Zach was from New York.
He started here. Yeah, he started here. Yeah, he started here. But no, I didn't see him in person. Not that old. I'm not that old, Pandji. Come on. No, but he was kind of getting famous at that time, and I remember seeing him being like, wow, that's really cool, because what I saw with him on stage was that he was just a guy on stage having so much fun. I was like, damn, that looks really fun. I want to do that. Because I guess growing up I didn't watch a ton of stand-up, but when I saw him I was like, that looks like fun. Just someone just goofing around. They're talking to the audience. They're laying down on the ground. He's doing all kinds of things, and he has funny jokes too. It's kind of, so that was one that initially I remember influenced me.
Tom, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you, Pandji. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you. You should follow Tom on his Instagram. It's TomDNYC, and also subscribe Tom's YouTube channel, which is also Tom the NYC. It's interesting. It's funny. Tom has this thing where he shameless plug. What was it?
Oh God! I had people like yelling that to me in the streets.
Oh really?
Yeah. Well, it started out as just a joke because I always thought it was funny on YouTube when people like plug their own stuff. They're like, yeah, you check out my video, and so whenever I would mention a past video of mine, I would just say sick plug.
Sick plug, yeah. Did you edit your own video?
Yeah, I edit my own video.
That's crazy.
It takes forever.
Every time there's a sick plug, there's always just that sound?
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I'll just be walking, I'll be like sitting on the subway just like, in my head or something, so I'll be like, sick plug! And I'll just walk up there, I'm like, all right, okay.
Tom, thank you very
Yeah,
much
man,
for doing
of course.
this. Don't forget to subscribe, Tom, the NYC, and I'll see you guys
Thank you.
soon. Bye-bye.
Terima kasih banyak udah nonton video ini sampai akhir. Mau mengingatkan saja bahwa seluruh video gua stand up di New York City bisa lu akses dengan menjadi member YouTube gua. Ada 3 level, ada yang Rp30.000, Rp125.000, ada yang Rp1,5 juta, masing-masing punya manfaat sendiri-sendiri. Tapi yang pasti, dari yang Rp30.000, lu udah bisa akses semua video stand up gua di New York City tanpa disensor, tanpa dipotong, termasuk video-video yang sebelumnya. Terima kasih sekali lagi.